You let me believe they were dead. I've replayed those words 1,000 times. In the shower, while making breakfast, at 3 a.m. when sleep won't come. 8 words that hit harder than any slap, any scream, any slammed door ever could. And the worst part, I couldn't defend myself, because he wasn't wrong. 3 weeks before Callister showed up in that parking lot, I found something I was never meant to see. I was cleaning out my mother's house after the funeral. You know how it is, sorting through decades of junk, tossing expired coupons, keeping random photos for reasons you can't explain. Then, I opened her jewelry box. Underneath her wedding ring and a pair of fake pearls sat a folded letter. Yellowed paper, creased like someone had read it dozens of times. The handwriting belonged to someone I recognized, someone from Callister's family. And the date? 2 days after I gave birth to the twins. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I read. Names I knew, bank account numbers, instructions. My mother, the woman who drove the getaway car when I fled New York, who held me while I sobbed through 36 hours of labor, who swore on her own grave that hiding was the only way to keep my babies safe, had been bought and paid for. Every truth I believed for 7 years was a purchased lie. Cedar Falls wasn't supposed to be forever. That's what I told myself when I first arrived, 23 years old, 8 months pregnant, terrified out of my mind. I picked it because nobody would think to look here. No Vance family connections, no high society fundraisers, just cornfields, church potlucks, and people who minded their own business. I got a job waitressing at a diner called Millie's, rented a tiny apartment above a hardware store, told everyone I was a widow, that my husband died in a car accident before he could meet his babies. People brought me casseroles. The church ladies threw me a baby shower. I cried real tears because their kindness felt like something I didn't deserve. When Mia and Marcus arrived, £6 each, screaming and perfect, I made myself a promise. They would never know fear. They would never know the cold marble hallways of the Vance estate. They would never sit through a dinner where their grandmother inspected them like livestock being graded for auction. They would be normal kids. Happy kids, mine. And for 7 years, it worked. Marcus played Little League. Mia took piano lessons from an elderly woman named Dorothy, who smelled like lavender and always had cookies. We had movie nights every Friday. I taught them to ride bikes in our gravel driveway. I thought I'd gotten away with it. I thought the past would stay buried in New York where it belonged. But the past doesn't stay anywhere. It just waits. It started small, the way these things always do. Marcus came home from school one afternoon, backpack dragging on the ground, face all scrunched up like he was working through a math problem he couldn't solve. "Mom, why don't we have a dad?" I had rehearsed this conversation 100 times. Widow story. Car accident. He loved you so much. Standard script. But looking at my son, who had Callister's exact jawline, Callister's exact way of tilting his head when he was thinking, the words stuck in my throat. "He died before you were born, sweetheart. I've told you this." "Yeah, but..." He kicked at the floor. "Tommy's dad died too. In the army. They have pictures everywhere, medals and stuff. How come we don't have anything?" I made something up. Told him the photos were lost in a move. He accepted it the way kids do when they're still young enough to trust their mothers completely. But Mia was watching from the hallway. She didn't say a word. Just looked at me with those dark Vance eyes, her grandmother's eyes, and I felt something cold crawl down my spine. She knew I was lying. She didn't know what about yet, but my daughter, my perceptive, too smart for her own good daughter, had clocked something false in my voice. That was the first crack. The letter in my mother's jewelry box? That was the earthquake. I need to take you back to New York, back to who I was before Cedar Falls. Before the fake widow story, before I became Marisol, the single mom who makes okay tips at Millie's diner. I was Marisol Vega, 22, working as a junior event coordinator for a catering company that handled Manhattan's wealthiest clients. That's how I met Callister. The Vance family was hosting a charity gala, the kind where a single centerpiece costs more than my monthly rent. I was running around with a headset, making sure the ice sculptures didn't melt and the champagne stayed flowing. He found me crying in a supply closet after his mother screamed at me for placing the wrong flowers on her table. "She does that to everyone," he said, handing me a tissue. "Last week, she made a florist cry so hard, the woman quit the industry entirely." I laughed. He smiled, and something between us just clicked. What happened next was the kind of love story you only believe when you're living it. Secret dates, whispered phone calls, stolen weekends at hotels where nobody knew the Vance name. I thought he was different from his family. I thought we could build something real. Then I got pregnant, and I found out exactly how the Vance family handled inconvenient situations. Or at least, I thought I found out. Because everything I believed about that night, about those threats, about why I had to run, my mother orchestrated all of it, and according to that letter, she wasn't working alone. So there I was, standing in that Piggly Wiggly parking lot, Callister 10 feet away from me. Our children, his children, arguing about Lucky Charms versus Frosted Flakes behind my back. He looked older, tired, like he'd spent 7 years searching for ghosts. Marisol. His voice cracked on my name. "Tell me those aren't..." Mia chose that exact moment to shout, "Mum, Marcus won't share the cart." I watched Callister's face change, watched him do the math. Twins, 7 years old, her face, his eyes. You let me believe they were dead. The accusation hung in the air between us. I had so many things I wanted to say. It wasn't like that. I was trying to protect them. Your mother threatened to take them away. I didn't have a choice. But the letter in my pocket, the one I'd been carrying since I found it, told a different story. A story where I was the victim too, where we'd both been played by people we trusted. "Callister," I finally managed, "I need to show you something. And when you see it, you're going to realize that everything we thought we knew was a lie. By the end of this story, you'll know who really pulled the strings. You'll understand why my own children eventually looked at me and said the words, 'No mother survives. We don't trust you anymore.' You're watching Untold Lineage, where the stories behind the names are never as simple as they look. Before we go back to the beginning, I want to know, drop it in the comments, if you discovered your own mother had been lying to you for years, could you forgive her? And if you love stories that peel back family secrets layer by layer, hit subscribe, because what happens next, you won't see it coming. Now, let me take you back to where this really started. The night I decided to run. Before Callister Vance, before the black Mercedes and the lies and the letter that changed everything, I was nobody. And I mean that literally. My studio apartment in Queens measured exactly 280 square feet. The walls had this greenish tint from water damage that never got fixed, no matter how many times I called the super. The radiator clanked all night, like someone was trapped inside trying to get out. And the mildew. I stopped smelling it after the first month. Your nose just gives up eventually. I worked as an administrative assistant at a venture capital firm in Manhattan. Sounds impressive until you realize what that actually meant. I fetched coffee. I organized files. I scheduled meetings for people who made more money in a lunch break than I made in a year. Nobody knew my name. I'm not being dramatic. After 11 months at that job, my supervisor still called me Maria. The receptionist thought I was Marissa. Once, during a holiday party, someone asked me which catering company I worked for. I smiled and pointed them toward the shrimp. You want to know what invisible feels like? It feels like existing in a room full of people who look right through you, like your presence doesn't register, like you could disappear tomorrow and nobody would notice until the coffee stopped showing up. I grew up in foster care, bounced between 6 homes before I aged out at 18. The only constant in my life was my foster sister Tamarind, but that's a story for later. The point is, I had no family, no safety net, no one waiting for me at the end of the day. When no one's ever chosen you, the first person who does can feel like destiny. That's what made me so dangerous to myself. That hunger, that desperate, aching need to be seen by someone, anyone, who might actually stay. The day I met Callister Vance, The office heating system had been broken for 3 days straight. I was sitting at my desk wearing 2 sweaters and a scarf, fingers so cold I kept making typos. My breath was actually visible, in a Manhattan high-rise, in a building that charged $40 per square foot. Everyone else had space heaters. Nobody thought to offer me one. Then he walked in. I didn't know who he was at first. Just another suit. Tall, dark hair, the kind of jawline you see in cologne advertisements. He was there for a meeting with the partners, the real players, the ones with corner offices and equity stakes. But instead of walking past my desk like everyone else did, he stopped. "You're freezing." I looked up. Those grey eyes locked onto mine, like I was the only person in the room, like I mattered. "The heating's been out," I managed. Brilliant conversation starter, I know. He didn't respond, just shrugged off his jacket, this beautiful charcoal wool thing that probably cost more than my rent, and draped it over my shoulders. "Keep it." I run hot anyway. Before I could protest, he disappeared into the conference room. I sat there wrapped in his jacket, smelling cedar and something expensive, feeling like the world had tilted slightly on its axis. 45 minutes later, he came back with 2 cups of coffee. Handed one to me. "Sorry for the wait. The machine on the executive floor takes forever, but it's actually drinkable. How did you know I drink coffee?" He smiled. I asked. Those 2 words should have been my first warning sign. He'd been in a meeting with senior partners, discussing millions of dollars in deals, and somewhere in there, he'd found time to ask someone about the shivering admin assistant at the front desk. Men like him never do anything without a reason. But I didn't think about reasons. I thought about his jacket still warm on my shoulders. I thought about the way he looked at me, really looked, when everyone else saw furniture. It felt like the universe had finally found me. I didn't realize it was actually the Vance family tightening a net. Dating Callister Vance was like being transported into someone else's life. Our first date wasn't dinner and a movie. It was a rooftop in Tribeca with a private chef and a view of the entire city spread out like glittering jewelry. He'd rented the whole space, just for us. "Is this normal for you?" I asked, staring at the skyline. "Nothing about you feels normal," he said. "So why would I give you normal?" I melted. Of course I did. Then came the private gardens in Connecticut, the weekend in Vermont where fresh snow covered everything, and we stayed in a cabin with a fireplace and a bathtub the size of my entire bathroom back home. The midnight Thai food runs where his driver took us to Queens, my neighborhood, and Callister tipped the restaurant owner $500 for staying open late. For someone who grew up counting pennies for subway fare, this wasn't just luxury, it was erasure. Every fancy hotel room made my cramped studio feel further away. Every expensive meal made me forget the nights I'd eaten ramen for a week straight because rent was due. He was rewriting my story. And I wanted him to. But here's what I didn't notice at the time. He always picked the places. Every restaurant, every destination, every activity. His choice. If I suggested my favorite pizza spot in Astoria, something would come up. A work emergency. A better idea. A "trust me, you'll love this" instead. He paid for everything. And I mean everything. I never saw a bill, never had the chance to contribute. At first, it felt generous. Later, I'd understand it was something else entirely, and he never stayed too long in my world. We'd visit Queens for food, but we never lingered, never met my neighbors, never existed in my reality for more than an hour or 2 before retreating back to his. One night, lying on silk sheets in a hotel suite, I asked about his family, about the Vance dynasty, about what they would think of someone like me. His jaw tightened. "They don't get to decide who I love." "I do." I heard rebellion. I heard a man choosing me over expectations and inheritance and everything his name represented. I should have heard a warning. His life was already a war zone, and I was walking straight into the crossfire. 11 months. 11 months of rooftops and Vermont cabins and midnight Thai food. 11 months of "I love you, and you're different, and you're the only real thing in my life." 11 months, and I still hadn't met his family. "When am I going to meet them?" I finally asked. We were in his apartment, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. I was curled up on his couch, wearing one of his shirts, trying to sound casual about something that had been eating at me for weeks. Callister's expression shifted, just slightly, a tightening around his eyes that I'd learned to recognize later. "They're complicated," he said. "Every family is complicated, not like mine." He crossed the room, sat beside me, took my hands in his. The gesture felt rehearsed, my mother especially. She has expectations, ideas about who belongs in our world and who doesn't. And I don't belong. That's not what I'm saying. "Then what are you saying, Callister?" He squeezed my hands. That perfect face, those grey eyes full of something that looked like sincerity. "I want them to see you the way I see you. That takes time. Strategy. I'm protecting you, protecting me. When someone says they're protecting you from their family, listen carefully. Sometimes what they're really protecting is their own comfort, their ability to exist in two worlds without those worlds colliding, their freedom to love you in private while keeping you hidden in public. I didn't understand that then. I just felt grateful. Here was this powerful man, this heir to billions, and he was shielding me from people who might hurt me. It felt romantic, noble even. 3 weeks later, he told me I was finally going to meet them. "Dinner at Thornhaven," he said, like he was announcing a trip to the dentist. "Saturday night. My mother's hosting." My stomach dropped. "You look terrified." He laughed. "Don't be. I'll be right there with you." Famous last words. The first time I saw Thornhaven, I understood something important. This wasn't a home. It was a statement. The Vance family estate sat on 40 acres in Greenwich, Connecticut. Stone walls covered in ivy that had probably been growing since before my grandparents were born. Windows that reflected the sunset like dozens of watching eyes. A circular driveway that could fit every car I'd ever seen in my neighborhood. Callister squeezed my hand as we walked toward the entrance. "Remember," he murmured, "don't let her get to you." Before I could ask what that meant, the doors swung open. The interior was worse than the exterior. Cold marble floors, vaulted ceilings, artwork on the walls that belonged in museums, probably stolen from them, knowing what I know now. Our footsteps echoed like we were walking through a mausoleum. Because that's what Thornhaven was. A mausoleum for a family that had forgotten how to be human. She was waiting in the parlor. Cordelia Vance. 63 years old, but you'd never know it. Face frozen in a permanent expression of mild distaste. Blonde hair swept back in a style that probably hadn't changed since the Reagan administration. Wearing a cream-colored dress that cost more than my yearly salary. She looked me up and down, the way you'd examine a stain on an antique carpet. So, her voice could have frozen champagne. "You're the girl. Not Callister's girlfriend. Not my name, which she certainly knew. The girl. Like I was a species rather than a person." Mother Callister started. "I'm speaking to our guest." She didn't offer her hand, didn't gesture toward a seat, just kept staring at me with those pale blue eyes. "He tells me you work in administration, filing papers and such. I'm an executive assistant at a venture capital firm. So, filing papers." A thin smile. How industrious. The next 40 to 5 minutes were a masterclass in elegant cruelty. Cordelia asked about my education, community college. How brave. My apartment. Queens. Isn't that where they filmed that dreadful show about drug dealers? My family. Oh, you don't have one? How terribly sad. Every word was a knife wrapped in silk. Then someone appeared in the doorway. An older man with Callister's jawline and none of his warmth. Callister, a word about the Singapore deal. Now, I watched Callister's face shift. Conflict, apology, resignation. "I'll be right back," he whispered to me. 5 minutes. He left me alone with her. Cordelia's smile changed the moment her son disappeared. Sharper now, honest in its malice. "You think you're special," she said quietly. "You think my son is different, that he'll choose love over family, romance over legacy." She set down her wine glass with a soft clink. Other girls have thought that too. Maybe I'm not like other girls. Oh, you're exactly like them. Pretty enough, hungry enough, desperate enough to believe the fantasy. She leaned forward slightly. But here's what you need to understand about my son, about all the Vance men. I waited. He'll choose us, you know. In the end, her pale eyes held mine without blinking. They always do. If you're watching this and wondering whether Cordelia was right, whether Callister chose his family over me, the answer is complicated. Because by the time the choice came, I'd already made one of my own. Quick thing before we continue. If this story is hitting different, go ahead and drop a comment telling me what you think of Cordelia so far. Monster or just protective mother? And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. The dinner at Thornhaven is about to get so much worse. The question I should have been asking wasn't whether Callister would choose me. It was why his mother was so certain I'd need to be eliminated. And the answer to that question? It would take me 7 years and one hidden letter to finally understand. The drive back from Thornhaven was quiet. Too quiet. Callister kept glancing at me, his hands tight on the steering wheel, that crease between his eyebrows deeper than I'd ever seen it. She was hard on you, he finally said. I'm sorry. I should have stayed. I stared out the window at the Connecticut darkness rushing past. My reflection looked pale, hollow. Cordelia's words were still echoing in my skull like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. He'll choose us, you know. In the end. They always do. It's fine, I heard myself say. She's protective of you. I understand. But I didn't tell him what she really said. I didn't mention the way her eyes had cut through me like I was something to be scraped off her son's shoe. I didn't describe the cold certainty in her voice when she told me I'd be discarded like all the others. Why didn't I tell him? I've asked myself that question 1,000 times since, and the honest answer isn't flattering. I didn't want to be that girl, the one who forces ultimatums, the one who makes him choose between his family and her. I'd seen enough romantic comedies to know that woman always loses. She becomes the villain of her own story, the jealous girlfriend who couldn't handle a difficult mother-in-law. And deeper than that, in the part of myself I didn't want to examine too closely, I was afraid. Afraid that if I told Callister what his mother said, he might pause a second too long before defending me. He might hesitate, and that hesitation would confirm everything Cordelia wanted me to believe. So I stayed silent. I told myself I was protecting our relationship, keeping the peace, being the bigger person. Really, I was protecting my fantasy, the dream that love would be enough, that I could exist in his world without being destroyed by it. Looking back, that silence was my first real betrayal, not of Callister, of myself. I swallowed the truth because the truth was too terrifying to face. And that's exactly what Cordelia was counting on. 6 weeks after Thornhaven, I was throwing up in the bathroom at work. At first I blamed the leftover Chinese food in my fridge. Then I blamed stress. Then I missed my period by 12 days and couldn't blame anything anymore. I bought 3 pregnancy tests, took them all, watched 3 little plus signs appear like messages from a future I hadn't planned for. Pregnant. I sat on my bathroom floor, that tiny mildew-stained bathroom in my Queen's studio, and stared at those tests for what felt like hours. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Terror came first. Raw, animal panic. I was 23. I made barely enough to cover my own rent. The father was a billionaire whose mother had already marked me for elimination. How was I supposed to raise a child in this mess? But then something else crept in. Something warm and fierce and completely unexpected. Joy. I pressed my hand against my stomach, still flat, no sign of anything different, and felt tears sliding down my cheeks. Happy tears. The first genuinely happy tears I'd cried in years. For the first time in my life, I belonged somewhere. Inside me was a person who was mine. Someone who wouldn't leave. Someone who wouldn't look through me like I was invisible. Someone who would need me in a way no one ever had before. I scheduled a doctor's appointment for the next day. Sat in the waiting room with my leg bouncing, filling out forms, trying to look calm. The ultrasound technician was a kind woman with grey hair and warm hands. She moved the wand across my stomach, squinting at the screen. Then she laughed. "Well," she said, "I hope you're ready for an adventure." "What do you mean?" She turned the screen toward me, pointed at two distinct shapes, two heartbeats flickering like tiny stars. Twins. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Twins. Two babies. Two heartbeats. Two people growing inside me who would share my blood and my love and my everything. That night, I prepared. Candles on every surface of my tiny apartment. Baby booties, yellow, neutral, perfect, wrapped in a box with a ribbon. I practiced what I would say to Callister in the mirror until the words felt natural. "We're having twins. You're going to be a father. Twice over. I know this is unexpected, but I love you, and I think we can do this." I fell asleep that night with my hand on my stomach, dreaming of a future where everything somehow worked out. I had 48 hours of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Then the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Manhattan area code, but not Callister's. I almost didn't answer. I was in the middle of arranging the candles, rehearsing my speech one more time, trying to decide whether to tell him about the twins before or after dinner. Something made me pick up anyway. Instinct, maybe. Or fate twisting the knife. Marisol. That voice. Cold as Thornhaven marble. "This is Cordelia Vance." My heart stopped. "I'll keep this brief," she continued. "My son won't be seeing you anymore. The relationship is over. He's asked me to communicate this on his behalf, as he felt a direct conversation would be unnecessarily emotional." The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of my kitchen counter to stay upright. "That's not. He wouldn't." "He would. And he has." A pause. I could hear her satisfaction through the phone. "He's engaged now. To Pemberley Ashford. Old family friends. Appropriate in ways you simply are not. Engaged." The word hit me like a physical blow. 48 hours ago, he'd held me in his arms and told me I was his future. Now he was engaged to someone else? "You're lying," I whispered. "Check the society pages tomorrow if you don't believe me." The announcement runs in the morning edition. My hand found my stomach. Those two heartbeats. Those two tiny lives that didn't know their world was collapsing before they'd even arrived. "I'm pregnant." The words came out before I could stop them. Desperate. Stupid. The last card I had to play. Silence on the other end. Then Cordelia's voice returned, and it was different now. Colder. Sharper. The mask fully off. "That's unfortunate, but easily handled. I'll have my lawyer contact you with appropriate arrangements. A clinic, a settlement. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, and this entire episode will be forgotten. I would never. Take care of it quietly, Marisol. That's my advice." Her tone made it clear this wasn't advice. It was a command. The alternative involves lawyers who will bury you, courts where my family has judges on speed dial, a public humiliation that will follow you for the rest of your insignificant life. I couldn't breathe. The room was shrinking. The candles I'd arranged so carefully seemed to mock me now, props from a fantasy that had just been exposed as a lie. "If you attempt to contact my son," Cordelia continued, "if you try to use this pregnancy as leverage, if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I will destroy you. Not metaphorically, completely. You will lose everything. Are we clear?" The line went dead. I stood there in my candlelit apartment, baby booties still wrapped in their ribbon, and felt something inside me shatter. Not break. Shatter. Into pieces too small to ever reassemble. In that moment, I believed something that would define the next 7 years of my life. The man I loved had chosen them over me. Over us. Over our children. Callister hadn't just left. He'd sent his mother to clean up the mess. And I was the mess. I didn't believe her. That's what I told myself through the longest night of my life. Cordelia was lying, manipulating, trying to scare me away. Callister loved me. He would never do this. At 7 a.m., I called his number. "The number you have dialed has been changed. The new number is unlisted. Changed. Overnight. Like I'd never existed. I threw on clothes and took the subway to his apartment building. The doorman, the same one who'd nodded at me dozens of times, who'd called me Miss Marisol and held the door while Callister and I laughed our way inside, blocked my path like I was a stranger. "I'm sorry, miss. Mr. Vance isn't accepting visitors. He knows me. We're together. Please, just call up and—" "I have explicit instructions." His face was stone. "You need to leave. Just tell him I'm here. Tell him Marisol is here. He'll want to see me." The doorman's hand moved toward his radio. Security backup. I was seconds away from being escorted out like a trespasser. I left, walked 20 blocks to the venture capital firm where we'd met, where he'd draped his jacket over my shoulders, where everything had begun. The receptionist, who still called me Maria after 11 months, looked up with blank politeness. "I need to see Callister Vance. He's in a meeting with the partners today." She checked her computer, frowned, made a phone call, whispered words I couldn't hear. 2 minutes later, building security appeared at my elbow. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. I just want to talk to him. You're not authorized to be on this floor. We're going to escort you to the exit." I was walked through the lobby in front of everyone. Co-workers who'd never learned my name watched me being removed like a criminal. The security guards flanked me all the way to the street and stood there until I walked away. Once, I was the woman Callister Vance flew to Vermont. The woman he rented rooftops for. The woman he looked at like she was the only real thing in his world. Now I couldn't get past the lobby. People with power don't always have to say no to you themselves. They don't have to reject you personally or explain why you're being cut off. Sometimes they just close every door around you until you disappear. They change numbers. They give instructions to doormen. They have security remove you, and the whole time, they never have to look you in the eye. That's what erasure looks like. Not dramatic confrontations. Not shouting matches. Just door after door after door closing in your face until you finally understand you were never real to them. You were a distraction. And distractions get eliminated. At 2 a.m., I called the only person I had left. Tamarind picked up on the second ring. She always did, no matter the hour. That was the thing about growing up together in foster care. You learned that 2 a.m. phone calls meant someone was drowning. "Sol?" Her voice was groggy but alert. "What happened?" I couldn't speak at first. Just sobbed into the phone like a child. All the fear and humiliation and heartbreak pouring out in sounds that weren't words. Tamarind waited. Didn't rush me. Didn't ask questions. Just breathed on the other end of the line until I could form sentences. "He left me." The words came out broken. "He's engaged to someone else. His mother called. She threatened me. I'm pregnant, Tam. I'm pregnant with twins. And he won't even talk to me." Silence. Then Tamarind's voice came back, steel wrapped in velvet. "Pack a bag. I'm coming." She showed up at my door 4 hours later. Didn't knock. Used the spare key I'd given her years ago. Found me curled on my bathroom floor, still in yesterday's clothes, surrounded by positive pregnancy tests. Tamarind was everything I wasn't. Practical, where I was emotional. Fierce, where I was fragile. She'd aged out of foster care the same year I did, but while I'd been chasing love stories and fairy tales, she'd been building a life with both feet on the ground. She looked at me on that floor and saw exactly what needed to happen. Get up. Shower. I'm making coffee. By noon, my apartment was packed. By 3 p.m. we were in her old Honda Civic heading west. The city skyline shrank in the rearview mirror. All those lights and towers and dreams I'd had about belonging somewhere, getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared. I watched Manhattan vanish and felt nothing. My body was numb. My mind was empty. The only thing I could feel was the faint flutter in my stomach. Too early for kicks, but I swore I felt them anyway. 2 heartbeats reminding me I wasn't alone. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, Tamarind finally spoke. "You could fight this. Lawyers, paternity tests. He's the father. He has obligations. Against the Vance family?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. They have judges, politicians, enough money to bury me in court for the rest of my life. By the time I won anything, my children would be grown, and I'd be bankrupt. So, what's the plan? I stared at the highway stretching ahead. Miles and miles of nothing. A clean slate. He doesn't want them. His mother made that clear. If I try to force him to be a father, they'll take them from me. They'll claim I'm unfit, unstable. They'll use their money and their power to make me disappear. Tamarind's hands tightened on the wheel. Then we make sure he never finds out. New town, new name, new life. The babies become yours and only yours. It wasn't a question. It was a plan. We stopped at a gas station somewhere in Ohio. While Tamarind filled the tank, I went to the bathroom. A grimy single-stall room with a cracked mirror and flickering lights. I stood there staring at my reflection, at the dark circles under my eyes, at the woman I'd become in the span of 48 hours. Homeless, pregnant, running from a family that wanted to erase me. I pressed my hand against my stomach. "I'll keep you safe," I whispered, "even if it means lying to everyone. Even if it means you never know where you came from. Even if it means lying to you." The face in the mirror didn't look convinced, but she was the only mother those babies had, so she would have to be enough. Cedar Falls Community Hospital, November 14th. 36 hours of labor. I remember the fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, Tamarind's hand crushing mine as I screamed through contractions that felt like my body was being torn apart. The doctors had warned me about complications. Twin births are risky under the best circumstances, and these weren't the best circumstances. I was stressed, underweight, running on fear and determination and not much else. But at 3:47 a.m., Mia arrived. 6 pounds, 2 ounces, a full head of dark hair, calloused as hair, eyes squeezed shut, tiny fists already clenched like she was ready to fight the world. 11 minutes later, Marcus followed. Smaller, 5 pounds, 8 ounces, but his gaze, even in those first moments, was focused, serious, like he was studying the room and cataloguing every detail. The nurse placed them in my arms, one in each, warm and squirming and impossibly small, and something cracked open inside me. Not pain this time. Something bigger, fiercer. Mia had her father's dark coloring, but her mouth was mine. When she cried, it sounded like a battle cry. Marcus had Callister's jawline already visible beneath the baby softness. That same intense focus in his eyes. He didn't cry at first, just looked at me like he was waiting for an explanation. I gave them new names. Not the ones I'd imagined during those 48 hours of joy before Cordelia's phone call. Those names belonged to a different future, one where their father was present and their grandmother wasn't a monster. Mia and Marcus. Simple, strong, untraceable. They're beautiful, Tamarind whispered from beside the bed. They're mine. That was the vow I made in that hospital room, staring down at 2 faces that carried pieces of a man who'd thrown me away. They would never be weapons in someone else's war. They would never be leverage. They would never sit in Thornhaven's cold marble halls while Cordelia inspected them like livestock. They were mine, and I would protect them from the world that had rejected us, even if it meant erasing half of who they were. Looking back, I can see the flaw in that logic. I thought isolation was protection. I thought hiding them was keeping them safe. I thought if I just loved them hard enough, they'd never need to know about the father who didn't want them. I was wrong about all of it. But holding those tiny bodies in that hospital bed, watching them breathe, feeling their hearts beat against my chest, I couldn't imagine any other choice. "I'll never let them hurt you," I promised, "even if it means hurting you myself." At the time, that didn't sound like a contradiction. It took 7 years to understand it was exactly that. Cedar Falls welcomed us without questions. That's the thing about small towns in the Midwest. People there have seen enough hardship to recognize when someone's running from something. They don't pry. They just make casseroles and offer hand-me-down baby clothes and pretend they believe whatever story you tell them. I told them I was a widow. Car accident. Husband died before he could meet the twins. They nodded sympathetically and invited me to church potlucks. Tamarind stayed for the first 6 months, helped me find a job, receptionist at a family medical clinic, set up the nursery in the small farmhouse we rented on the edge of town, made sure I ate when I forgot to, held the babies when I cried. Then she went back to New York to live her own life, but she called every week, sent money when I was short, remained the only person on earth who knew the truth. Years passed, 1, then 2, then 5. The twins grew. I grew around them. We built a life that was small and quiet, and nothing like the rooftops and Vermont cabins of my past. I planted a garden. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs. The soil was nothing like Queen's concrete, and I learned to love the feeling of dirt under my fingernails. We went to school events, PTA meetings, 4th of July parades where the fire trucks sprayed water and kids chased each other with sparklers. Mia made friends easily, loud, confident, always the center of attention. Marcus hung back and observed. They balanced each other, completed each other in ways that made my heart ache. For a while, I believed I'd outrun the Vances, maybe even outrun myself. Cedar Falls was safe, anonymous, a place where nobody knew the name Vance, where billionaires were characters in movies, where a woman could raise 2 children alone and nobody thought twice about it. I convinced myself this was permanent, that we'd stay here forever, that the past was a door I'd locked and the key had been thrown away. But keys have a way of resurfacing, and locked doors don't stay locked forever. By age 6, the twins were developing personalities that terrified me. Marcus was the logical one. He challenged everything. Teachers, rules, things I told him were just the way it is. He'd raise his hand in class and ask questions that made his kindergarten teacher look uncomfortable. One day, he came home furious about something a classmate had said. Tommy said rich people are all bad guys, like in movies. But that's not true, is it, Mom? My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I mean, being rich doesn't make you evil. Actions make you evil, right? Having money is neutral. It's what you do with it that matters. He was 6 years old. 6. And he was already arguing about moral philosophy like a tiny professor. I looked at my son, at his focused expression, his serious eyes, that jawline that would someday look exactly like his father's, and felt a chill run down my spine. Mia was different, but equally unsettling. She felt everything intensely. Happiness, sadness, anger. Each emotion consumed her completely. When she was joyful, she lit up the room. When she was hurt, she shut down entirely. Walls came up. Eyes went cold. I recognized that coldness. I'd seen it in Thornhaven, in Cordelia's pale gaze, in the way the Vance family treated emotions like weaknesses to be suppressed. Sometimes Mia would look at me after I said something she didn't like, and for a split second, I saw her grandmother staring back. It chilled me to the bone. I was raising children who reminded me of the very world I'd tried to escape. Their genes carried echoes of a family they'd never met, a family I'd told myself they'd never need to know. But blood doesn't forget. Heritage doesn't stay hidden just because you want it to. Every day, my children became more like the people I was protecting them from, and I didn't know whether to be proud or terrified. It was Mia who asked first. We were at a school event, one of those bring your family nights where kids showed off art projects and parents pretended to be interested. Fathers were everywhere. Dads in baseball caps tossing their kids on shoulders. Dads helping with homework. Dads just present. Mia watched them with an expression I couldn't read. Mom. Her voice was quiet. Why don't we have a dad? I'd rehearsed this conversation, practiced it in my head for years. But when the moment came, the words felt hollow. He's not part of our lives, sweetheart. But we're not missing anything. We have each other. But where is he? He passed away. Before you were born. Then how come we don't have pictures or stuff that was his? Tommy's dad died in the army, and they have his medal and his flag and everything. Marcus looked up from his art project, those observant eyes tracking my reaction, recording it, analyzing. Some things are too painful to keep, I said. I wanted to focus on the future, not the past. Mia accepted this, nodded slowly, and went back to watching the other fathers. But Marcus kept looking at me, like he knew, even at 6 years old, that my answer was incomplete. Like he was filing this conversation away for future examination. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the porch and stared at the stars. Tamarin's voice echoed in my memory from our last phone call. What happens when they want answers you can't give? I'd brushed off the question then. They were too young to really understand. I had time. I could figure out a better story later. But later was coming faster than I'd expected. And I was running out of lies that felt believable. Here's the thing about half-truths. They're still lies. A story that's 60% true is still 100% false. And children, especially smart, observant children like mine, can sense the gaps in what you're telling them. They might not know what's missing yet, but they know something is. There were good days. So many good days. Birthday parties in our backyard with homemade cake and dollar store decorations. The twins blowing out candles while the neighbors sang off-key. Mia's delighted laughter. Marcus's small, satisfied smile. Homework sessions at the kitchen table. Marcus explaining fractions to his sister with the patience of a tiny professor. Mia drawing pictures in the margins of her worksheets. Dragons and castles and princesses with swords. Summer evenings chasing fireflies through the backyard. The kids running barefoot through the grass, catching lightning bugs in mason jars, faces glowing with pure joy. Those were the moments I lived for. The proof that I'd made the right choice. That our small, secret life was enough. But the nights were different. After they were asleep, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at nothing. Thinking about Callister, wondering if he ever thought about me. If he knew, somehow, that somewhere in the world, 2 children carried his blood. Did he look at Pemberley Ashford across the breakfast table and feel satisfied with his choice? Did he sleep peacefully in Thornhaven while his children grew up not knowing his name? Or did some part of him wonder, late at night, what might have been? I hated myself for still thinking about him, for still caring. After everything his family had done, after being erased and threatened and thrown away like garbage, I still caught myself missing the way he laughed, the way he looked at me like I mattered. Those guilty nights were the worst, because in the darkness, with no one watching, I couldn't hide from the truth. I hadn't just run from the Vances. I'd run from myself, from the woman who'd loved so desperately that she'd ignored every warning sign, from the mother who was building her children's lives on lies. You can't construct a peaceful life on a rotting foundation. Eventually, the floor gives way. I knew that, but I kept walking anyway, pretending the creaking sounds were nothing. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Mail arrived like it always did. Bills, junk, a flyer for the county fair, and one unmarked envelope. No return address, postmarked from New York City. My name written in block capitals that felt aggressive, angry. I opened it in the kitchen while the twins ate cereal and argued about whose turn it was to pick the TV channel. Inside was a single sheet of white paper. 3 sentences, all capitals. He's looking for them. He's getting close. Run. The kitchen tilted. I grabbed the counter to steady myself. The kids didn't notice, too absorbed in their argument to see their mother's world collapsing. Who sent this? How did they find me? How did they know? And which he were they talking about? Callister? Someone else? I burned the letter in the backyard after the twins left for school, watched the paper curl and blacken, told myself it was nothing, a prank. Someone from my past being cruel. It didn't mean anything. But that night, sleep wouldn't come. And the night after that. And the night after that. Every car that drove past our house felt like a threat. Every stranger who glanced at the twins in the grocery store seemed suspicious. The hypervigilance I'd worked so hard to bury came roaring back. Someone knew where we were. Someone knew who my children really were. And they'd sent me a warning. The question was, were they trying to help me? Or were they the danger I should be running from? 2 weeks after the letter, I saw the car. Black sedan, tinted windows, parked at the end of our street, where nobody ever parked. Just sitting there. Engine off, no one getting in or out. The first time, I convinced myself it was a visitor for one of the neighbors, someone waiting to pick up a friend, nothing to worry about. The second time, 3 days later, my heart started pounding. The third time, I wrote down the license plate with shaking hands. Tamarind urged me to call the police. "Get it on record," she said during our phone call. "If something happens, there needs to be a paper trail." But I couldn't. What would I tell them? That I'd hidden my children from their billionaire father for 6 years? That I was living under a fake story? That a mysterious letter had warned me someone was coming? The moment I involved police, my whole life became evidence. Documentation. Things that could be found by Vance family lawyers. So I watched the car instead. Tracked its appearances. Tried to find patterns. It never stayed longer than an hour. Never approached the house. Never seemed to do anything except exist. A black shadow at the edge of our safe little world. Here's what didn't make sense. If this was the Vance family, why would they stalk? They had unlimited resources. Armies of lawyers. Investigators who could verify paternity in days. If they wanted to take my children, they wouldn't waste time with surveillance. They'd strike. Papers served. Courts mobilized. A legal assault. I couldn't possibly survive. But if it wasn't them, then who? I was still trying to figure that out when Mia noticed. She was standing at the living room window, looking out at the street. I didn't realize she was watching until she spoke. "Mom." Her voice was strange, flat. "That black car is back." I crossed the room to stand behind her. The sedan was there again. Same spot. Same tinted windows, hiding whoever was inside. Is he here for us? My daughter, 6 years old, trusting, asking me a question I couldn't answer. "No, sweetheart," I lied. "It's probably just someone visiting a neighbor." She looked at me with those dark eyes. Her grandmother's eyes. "You're lying," she said quietly. "I can tell when you're lying now." Before I could respond, she walked away, left me standing at the window, staring at a car that held all my worst fears. If you're still with me, and I hope you are because this story is about to take a turn nobody saw coming, take a second to subscribe. What I'm about to tell you next changes everything. The letter, the car, the person inside it. It wasn't who I thought, and neither was the real enemy, the Piggly Wiggly parking lot. 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. I can still hear every sound from that moment. The shopping cart wheels squeaking against asphalt, a truck engine idling 3 rows over, country music drifting from someone's open window. Mia and Marcus arguing about cereal in that endless way siblings do. Lucky Charms versus Frosted Flakes, a debate that had been running for approximately 6 years. Normal sounds, safe sounds, the soundtrack of the invisible life I'd built. Then the Mercedes appeared, black, sleek, windows tinted so dark they looked like mirrors, Manhattan plates that screamed money and power, and everything Cedar Falls wasn't. My hands froze on the shopping cart handle. Time did that strange thing it does in moments of crisis, stretching and compressing simultaneously. I watched the car roll past the pickup trucks and minivans like a shark gliding through a school of minnows. It stopped, 20 feet away. The engine cut off. I knew. Before the door opened, before I saw his face, before anything was confirmed, I knew. My body recognized the threat before my brain caught up. 7 years of hiding, and my past had just pulled into a parking space. The driver's door swung open. Callister stepped out. He looked older, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, grey threading through the dark hair at his temples. But it was him, the same sharp cheekbones, the same way of standing like he owned whatever ground was beneath his feet. His gaze swept the parking lot, searching, hunting. Then he found me. For a moment, neither of us moved. 7 years collapsed into a single held breath. I saw recognition hit him, saw his expression shift from searching to finding to something I couldn't name. Then his eyes moved past me, to the shopping cart, to the 2 children standing beside it. Mia, dark hair, like his, that stubborn set to her jaw. Marcus, those serious eyes, that calculating expression. I watched Callister do the math, watched understanding crash through him like a wave breaking against rock. His face went pale. His hands started shaking. Marisol. My name came out broken, barely a whisper. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except stand there while my carefully constructed world crumbled around me. He took a step forward, then another, his eyes never leaving the twins. You let me believe they were dead. 8 words. Quiet, devastated. An accusation that carried 7 years of grief in every syllable. And I had absolutely no idea what he meant. Dead. The word came out of my mouth before I could stop it. Confused. Defensive. Completely lost. What are you talking about? I never told anyone. The abortion. Callister's voice cracked on the word. My mother showed me the paperwork. The clinic records. Your signature on the consent forms. She said you took the money and ended the pregnancy. The parking lot tilted. I grabbed the cart to keep from falling. Abortion. Callister, there was no money. I didn't sign anything. I saw the documents. His hands were shaking now. His whole body was shaking. I saw your signature. I mourned them, Marisol. For 7 years I thought you'd killed our children for a settlement check. The horror of it hit me like a physical blow. He didn't abandon us. He didn't choose Pemberley and the family fortune over me and the twins. He thought we didn't exist anymore. He thought I'd taken blood money and erased our babies like they were an inconvenience. Cordelia hadn't just separated us. She'd made us hate each other for crimes neither of us committed. I never signed anything, I said slowly. Each word, deliberate, trying to make him understand. I never saw any money. Your mother called me after I found out about the pregnancy. She threatened me, told me to disappear or she'd destroy me. I ran because I thought you'd sent her. I thought you didn't want us. Want you? His voice rose, pain and anger mixing together. I looked for you for 3 years. I hired investigators. I went to your apartment. It was empty. Your job. They said you'd quit. It was like you'd vanished from the earth. And every time I tried to search harder, my mother showed me those documents. Proof that there was nothing left to find. We stared at each other across that parking lot. 2 people who'd spent 7 years hating phantom versions of each other. 2 people who'd been manipulated so thoroughly we couldn't see the strings until now. At this point, who do you blame more? Me for disappearing, or him for believing his mother? Drop your answer in the comments while we keep going, because this next part is where everything breaks even further. The car door opened behind me. I'd been so focused on Callister that I'd forgotten about the twins, forgotten that they were watching, listening, processing everything with those sharp minds I'd spent 6 years nurturing. Marcus stepped out first, cautious, deliberate, his eyes moving between me and Callister like he was solving an equation. Mia followed, hovering near the cart, her expression guarded in a way that made my heart ache. Callister's attention snapped to them. I watched his face transform, grief and wonder and something desperate fighting for control. These are my... He couldn't finish the sentence. The words were too big. Kids, this is... I started. You're our dad. Marcus, my logical, observant, too smart for his own good son, stating it like a fact he'd already confirmed through evidence. Callister made a sound that wasn't quite a word. His knees buckled. Right there in the Piggly Wiggly parking lot, this man who probably owned buildings and companies and more money than our whole town would see in a lifetime. He dropped to his knees on the dirty asphalt. Yes, his voice was raw, wrecked. Yes, I'm your father. Marcus studied him with that intense focus. Then, why did you leave us? The question hung in the air like a blade. I watched Callister struggle, watched him try to find words that could explain 7 years of absence to a child who didn't understand corporate intrigue and forged documents and family manipulation. I didn't know you existed, he finally said. Someone lied to me, made me think you were gone before you were even born. I would never have stayed away if I'd known. Marcus processed this, turned to look at me. Those eyes that missed nothing. Mom knew. Not a question. An observation. He wasn't just asking why his father had left. He was asking why his mother had never corrected the lie. I stood there in that parking lot, and I realized something terrible. Callister wasn't the only one on trial here. I was too. And my own children were the jury. I couldn't bring him to our house. That space was ours, mine and the twins. The place where I'd rocked them through fevers and helped with homework and built a life that didn't include him. Letting him inside felt like an invasion I wasn't ready for. But I couldn't send him away either. Not with the twins staring at him like he was a puzzle they needed to solve. Not with questions hanging in the air that would only multiply if I tried to postpone them. "There's a park," I heard myself say. "2 blocks from here. We can talk there." Callister nodded. He'd follow me anywhere right now. I could see it in his eyes, the desperation of a man who'd just discovered he had children and was terrified of losing them again. We drove separately, his Mercedes trailing my old Honda like a shadow. The twins sat in the back seat, unusually quiet. Marcus staring out the window. Mia watching me in the rearview mirror with an expression I couldn't read. The park was nearly empty. Late afternoon on a weekday. A few kids on the distant soccer field. An elderly couple walking a small dog. The twins headed for the swings without being asked. Old habit. This was the park where I'd taught them to pump their legs, to fly higher, to trust that the chains would hold. Now they sat there like sentries, watching me and Callister settle onto a weathered bench, close enough to hear, far enough to pretend they weren't listening. The sun was starting to set. Orange light painting the rusted playground equipment. The squeaking of swing chains mixing with birdsong and distant traffic. In another context, it might have been beautiful. Right now, it just felt like the calm before a storm. "Start at the beginning," I said. "Tell me exactly what she told you." Callister stared at his hands. They were still trembling. This man, who'd probably negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, couldn't steady his own fingers. "After you disappeared, I went looking for you. Your apartment was cleared out. No forwarding address. Your job said you'd resigned without notice. I called your phone, disconnected. It was like you'd been erased from existence." I remembered those days, driving west with Tamarind, watching New York shrink in the rearview mirror, thinking I was escaping. I was actually just playing into Cordelia's hands. "My mother told me you'd come to her," Callister continued, "before you left. She said you'd demanded money, threatened to go public with the pregnancy unless you were paid off. That's a lie. I know that now." He cut me off gently. "But then?" "She showed me documents. Bank transfers to an account in your name. A settlement agreement with your signature. And," he paused, swallowed hard, "clinic records, showing you'd terminated the pregnancy 3 weeks after we last spoke." My stomach lurched. "She forged my signature. Perfectly." He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a photo, held it out to me. I looked at the image on the screen. A medical form, official letterhead, and at the bottom, a signature in flowing cursive. It looked like my handwriting. The loops, the slant, the way I crossed my T's. Someone had studied my signature carefully enough to reproduce it almost flawlessly. Almost. "The L," I said slowly. "I don't loop my L's that way. And the date, I write the month first, not the day. Small details, things only I would notice, but enough to prove this wasn't real." "I believed it for 7 years," Callister said quietly. "I believed you'd taken money to end our children's lives. I hated you, Marisol, genuinely hated you. And the whole time she was—" He couldn't finish. I looked at that forged document, at the meticulous care someone had taken to erase me and my children from Callister's life, and I understood something for the first time. I wasn't just a woman his mother disapproved of. I was a threat that required elimination. Cordelia hadn't simply manipulated her son. She'd created an entire false reality for him to live in. Sometimes the cruelest lies are the ones that use just enough truth to sound believable. I had disappeared. I had been pregnant. Those facts made the fiction around them feel solid enough to trust. And Callister had trusted his mother over the woman he loved. I wasn't sure yet whether I could forgive him for that. What happened after? I asked. After you thought I was gone. Callister's jaw tightened. My mother happened, the way she always does. He told me about Pemberley Ashford, the society wedding that happened 6 months after I vanished. How he'd gone through the motions like a sleepwalker, too grief-stricken and angry to resist his family's plans. The marriage lasted 4 years, he said. Pemberley was fine, appropriate, everything my mother wanted, but I couldn't love her. I couldn't love anyone. Part of me was still stuck in that apartment with you, replaying every moment and wondering how I'd missed the signs. What signs? That you were just using me. That's what I believed. His voice was bitter. Not at me, at himself. My mother convinced me I'd been a fool, a target, that women like you saw men like me as ATMs, not partners. I thought about the woman I'd been at 23, working as an admin, living in a mildewed studio, desperate to be seen by someone, anyone. I hadn't been a gold digger, but I understood how easily the narrative could be twisted. When did you realize she was lying? 3 years ago. Callister looked at the twins on their swings. I found documents in her office, financial records that didn't match what she'd told me. The settlement she claimed she'd paid you, there was no record of the money actually being transferred. The account she said was yours had never existed. So you went looking for me again. I hired new investigators. Better ones. People who weren't on my mother's payroll. He turned back to me. They found traces of you in Iowa, medical records from a hospital, a woman who'd given birth to twins 7 years ago, but every time they got close, the trail went cold. I thought about those years in Cedar Falls, the careful anonymity, the fake story about being a widow. I'd hidden well, but apparently not well enough. What about your family now? I asked. Your mother. I cut her off. The words came out flat, hard. 3 years ago, when I discovered the forgery, we haven't spoken since. My father died last year, heart attack. And Pemberley and I divorced 2 years ago. There's nothing left of that world for me, Marisol. Nothing but money I never wanted, and a name I've come to hate. I studied him. This man I'd loved so desperately at 23. He wasn't the prince I'd imagined back then. He wasn't the villain I'd created in my mind during 7 years of hiding. He was just a man, flawed, manipulated, trying to find his way out of a life that had been constructed around him like a cage. We had more in common than I'd realized, but that didn't mean I trusted him. Not yet. So, what do you want? I asked. The question came out sharper than I intended. You found us. Congratulations. What happens now? Callister didn't flinch at my tone. Maybe he expected it. I want to know them. He looked at the twins again. Mia was swinging higher now, hair flying. Marcus was barely moving, still watching us with those calculating eyes. I want a chance to be their father, not to replace the life you've built. I know I can't do that, but to be present, to be part of their story. Your world isn't safe. The words came out fast, defensive. It destroyed us once. Your mother forged documents to make you think I'd killed your children. What do you think she'll do when she finds out they actually exist? My mother won't find out. You can't guarantee that. No. He admitted it without hesitation. I can't. But I can promise that I've spent 3 years building a life separate from her, separate from the Vance name. I have resources she doesn't control, lawyers she hasn't bought. I'm not the man I was 7 years ago, Marisol. I'm not under her thumb anymore. I wanted to believe him. Part of me, the part that still remembered Vermont snowfall and rooftop dinners, ached to believe him. But I'd learned too much about hope to trust it blindly. And if your mother finds out anyway, if she decides grandchildren are assets to be acquired, if she comes after custody with her army of lawyers and judges. Callister was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, heavier. I don't know how to keep them completely safe. I wish I could promise you absolute security, but I'd be lying. He met my eyes directly. What I can promise is this: I'm not willing to lose them again. Whatever it takes, whatever resources, whatever legal protection, whatever fights we have to fight, I won't walk away. Not from them, And not from you. I didn't know what to say to that. The sun had dipped below the tree line now. The playground was bathed in fading purple light. The temperature was dropping. On the swings, the twins had stopped moving, both of them watching us, waiting for a verdict. Marcus's expression was calculating. He was trying to figure out what came next, what moves were being made, what strategies were being deployed. Mia's face was harder. That cold shutdown I'd seen too many times before. The wall she built when she felt betrayed. They looked like their father, both of them, and they looked like strangers. We walked back to the cars in silence. The twins stayed several steps ahead of us, a united front that excluded both their parents. I recognized that formation. It was the same way I'd walked with Tamarind through hostile foster homes. Us against them. Except now, I was the them. Callister paused by his Mercedes. He pulled out a business card, plain white, just a phone number, no name or title, and pressed it into my hand. "Call me when you're ready to talk again," he said quietly. "I won't push. I won't show up unannounced. Whatever timeline you need, I'll respect it." I pocketed the card without looking at it. "And if I'm never ready?" Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, fear, resignation. "Then I'll wait. However long it takes." He turned to the twins. Mia immediately looked away, arms crossed tight. Marcus met his gaze but didn't speak. "It was..." Callister's voice faltered. "It was good to meet you, both of you. I know this is confusing. I know you have a lot of questions. I'd like to answer them when you're ready." Mia said nothing. Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded once. A small acknowledgement that didn't commit to anything. Callister got into his Mercedes. The engine purred to life. I watched the black car roll out of the parking lot and disappear down the street. The same direction the surveillance car had always come from. Had that been him? All those weeks? Watching us from a distance, gathering courage or information or both. Another question I didn't have the energy to ask. I unlocked the Honda. "Get in. We're going home." The drive was silent. We pulled into the driveway of our farmhouse. Home. The place that had felt so safe for so many years. It didn't feel safe anymore. I turned off the engine. Nobody moved to get out. "So," I said carefully, "do you want to talk about..." "He's lying." Marcus, his voice flat. "Certain." I twisted in my seat to look at him. "What do you mean?" "The dad guy." "Callister." Marcus stared straight ahead through the windshield. "He's lying. Not about everything. Maybe not even about the big stuff. But there's something he's not telling us." "What makes you think that?" "His hands." Marcus finally met my eyes. When he talked about cutting off his mom, his hands were steady. But when he talked about what he wants now, knowing us, being part of our lives, they started shaking again. If he was telling the truth about both things, the physical response would be consistent. My son, 7 years old, analyzing deception through body language like a tiny interrogator. I wanted to defend Callister, to explain that shaking hands might just mean emotion, not dishonesty, that adults are complicated, that sometimes fear and hope look the same from the outside. But I didn't know if any of that was true. Marcus might be wrong, or he might have caught something I'd missed. I'd spent 7 years teaching him to be honest, to observe carefully, to trust his instincts. Now he was looking at me like I was a stranger who'd broken every lesson I'd ever taught. "I don't know what he's hiding," I admitted. "Maybe nothing, maybe something, but I promise we'll figure it out together. Okay?" Marcus nodded slowly, not satisfied, but willing to wait. Mia hadn't said a word. We made it inside the house before the storm broke. Mia stopped in the middle of the living room. That living room, where we'd built blanket forts and watched movies and laughed until our stomachs hurt. The same space where I'd convinced myself we were happy. She turned to face me, and her expression was ice. "You lied to us, Mia. Our whole lives." Her voice was trembling now, but not with sadness. Rage. Pure, righteous rage. Every single day for 7 years. "You told us our dad wasn't part of our lives anymore. You let us think he didn't want us. I was trying to protect you. Protect us from what? She was shouting now. From a dad who wanted to find us. From grandparents who might love us. From knowing who we actually are. From people who would use you as weapons. My own voice rose to match hers. Callister's family, his mother, she threatened to destroy me. To take you away. I was terrified, Mia. I was 23 years old and pregnant with twins, and the most powerful woman I'd ever met told me she'd crush me if I didn't disappear. So you ran? Mia's eyes were bright with unshed tears she refused to let fall. And you decided for us. You decided we didn't get to know our father. You decided who we got to be. I did what I thought was right. You did what was easier. The words hit like a slap. It was easier to run than to fight, easier to lie than to explain, easier to keep us small and hidden than to let us be part of a bigger story. She was 7 years old. 7. But in this moment, she sounded ancient, like she'd already figured out truths I was still running from. Mia, please try to understand. I understand plenty. Her voice went quiet now, cold in that way I recognized. That Vance coldness that I'd tried so hard to prevent. You could have trusted us. Eventually, when we were old enough, you could have told us the truth and let us decide how we felt about it. You're still not old enough. But you didn't. She cut me off. You didn't trust us. And now I know why. She looked at me with her grandmother's eyes. Because you knew that if we had the truth, we might not choose you. The words hung in the air between us. A knife I didn't know how to remove. Then Mia turned and walked to her room. The door closed quietly behind her. Somehow, that was worse than a slam. I stood in the living room, surrounded by 7 years of memories, and felt everything I'd built crumbling into dust. That night, after both kids had retreated to their rooms and the house was silent, I sat on the porch and forced myself to look at the truth. The whole truth. Not the edited version I'd been telling myself for 7 years. Was I protecting my children from Cordelia Vance? Yes. That part was real. The threat was genuine. The fear was justified. But that wasn't the only reason I ran. There was something else. Something uglier. Something I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it didn't exist. I was afraid of losing. Afraid that if I fought, if I stayed and battled the Vance family in courts and custody hearings and public opinion wars, I'd be exposed as exactly what Cordelia said I was. A nobody from nowhere with nothing to offer. A foster care kid who got lucky enough to catch a billionaire's eye and then got exactly what she deserved when the fantasy ended. Pride. That's what it was. Twisted, wounded pride. If I disappeared, I didn't have to lose. I could tell myself I'd escaped rather than been defeated. I could raise my children far from the people who'd rejected me and pretend that was victory instead of retreat. And there was something even darker than pride. Control. In Cedar Falls, I was the only parent, the only authority, the only source of truth about who my children were and where they came from. I decided what stories they heard. I decided what questions got answered. I decided who they were allowed to love. I called it protection. But a small, ugly part of me liked being the only one they needed. Liked having complete control over their reality. Liked knowing that no one could take them from me because no one knew they existed. That's the hardest truth to admit. The one that makes me look least like a hero, and most like the villain Cordelia probably painted me as. I told myself I was shielding my children from harm. But I was also shielding myself from pain, from rejection, from the possibility that my children might love their father's world more than mine. When you don't acknowledge your own selfishness, you turn it into righteousness. You pass it on like an inheritance, dressed up as wisdom and sacrifice. My children weren't just learning about their father tonight. They were learning that their mother was capable of profound deception, and they were right not to trust me. I've been sitting with this confession for a while now, and I think I owe it to you to ask the question directly. If you're a parent, or you've had parents who kept big secrets, I want to know, do you think I was protecting my kids? Or was I just protecting myself from pain? Because I genuinely don't know anymore. The line between those two things has gotten so blurred over 7 years that I can't see where one ends and the other begins. Drop your answer in the comments. Not to judge me, though you're welcome to do that too, but because I think there are a lot of us carrying secrets, telling ourselves stories about why we do what we do, and sometimes it takes a stranger on the internet to help you see clearly. Your story might help someone else who's carrying their own burden right now. And if you've made it this far into my mess, hit subscribe. Because what happens next with Callister, with Cordelia, with my children who no longer trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. The next morning, the phone rang, and everything got worse. I hadn't slept. Not really. Just that shallow, restless dozing, where your body pretends to rest while your mind runs endless circles. Mia's words kept replaying. You could have trusted us. You didn't. Marcus's observation, he's lying. Not about everything, but about something, and underneath it all, Callister's devastated voice. You let me believe they were dead. The buzz pulled me out of the fog. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, expecting an alarm I'd forgotten to turn off. Unknown number. No caller ID. A text message. 4 words that made my blood freeze. He didn't come alone. I sat up so fast my vision blurred. Read it again. Then again. The words didn't change. He didn't come alone. A second message appeared. 3 more words. Check your mail. My hands were shaking so hard, I nearly dropped the phone. The same trembling I'd felt 7 years ago when Cordelia called. The same cold dread pooling in my stomach. Someone was watching. Someone knew Callister had found us. And someone wanted me to know they knew. Who? The same person who'd sent the first letter months ago, the one warning me to run. Or someone new, someone connected to the Vance family, reporting back to Cordelia. I threw off the blankets. My feet hit the cold floor, and I was moving before my brain caught up, grabbing a robe, checking that the twins' doors were still closed. Through the kitchen, past the coffee maker I hadn't turned on, out the front door into the grey morning light. The mailbox sat at the end of our gravel driveway, ordinary, rusted in spots. The same mailbox that had delivered bills and junk mail and school newsletters for 7 years. Now it felt like a bomb waiting to detonate. I walked toward it on legs that didn't feel like mine. The morning air was cool against my face. Birds were singing somewhere. Normal sounds, safe sounds. Nothing about this was normal or safe. I opened the mailbox. Another unmarked envelope waited inside. Same as the first one. No return address. My name in those aggressive block capitals. This wasn't over. It hadn't even really started. I carried the envelope back inside with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The kitchen table. Morning light streaming through the window. Coffee growing cold in the pot I'd set to auto-brew and forgotten about. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at my name on that envelope. Part of me wanted to burn it like I'd burned the first one. Pretend it didn't exist. Go back to the comfortable denial that had served me so well for 7 years. But denial wasn't an option anymore. Callister had found us. The twins knew the truth. Whatever protection ignorance had offered was already gone. I tore open the envelope. 3 items inside. The first was a photograph, printed on glossy paper, clearly taken with a professional lens. It showed Mia and Marcus walking into Cedar Falls Elementary. Their backpacks, their winter coats. The timestamp in the corner read 3 days ago. Someone had been photographing my children at school. While I was at work, while I thought they were safe. My knees buckled. I grabbed the counter to stay upright, staring at my babies captured in that image, unaware, vulnerable, being watched by someone I couldn't see or identify. The second item was a newspaper clipping, old, yellowed, carefully preserved. A society page announcement from the New York Times, dated 8 years ago. Vance family announces engagement. Callister Vance to wed Pemberley Ashford in spring ceremony. The headline I'd never seen. The announcement Cordelia had told me about on that phone call. Proof that at least part of her story had been true. But why send this now? What was the point? The third item answered that question. A single sheet of paper. Typed. 1 sentence. Cordelia doesn't lose. I read those 3 words over and over. Each time they hit harder. Cordelia doesn't lose. Not Cordelia knows. Not Cordelia is coming. Not even a direct threat. Just a statement of fact. A reminder of who I was dealing with. A woman who had forged documents and destroyed relationships and erased me from her son's life without breaking a sweat. And now she knew about the twins. I sank into a kitchen chair, photographs and clippings scattered in front of me, trying to make my brain work through the panic. Who was sending these? Were they warning me? Threatening me? Both? If this was someone working for Cordelia, why not just report back to her directly? Why the anonymous letters, the cryptic messages, the drawn-out psychological torture? And if this wasn't Cordelia's person, if this was someone else entirely, what did they want? I didn't have answers. All I had was a photograph of my children and the growing certainty that the walls were closing in. 2 fronts. That's what I faced now. On one side, the external threat. Someone watching my children. Someone connected to the Vance family. Or at least someone who knew enough about them to understand what Cordelia was capable of. Letters and texts and photographs that proved our hiding place wasn't hidden anymore. On the other side, my children. Mia, who wouldn't look at me at breakfast. Marcus, who watched everything with those calculating eyes but refused to share what he was thinking. The trust I'd spent 7 years building, demolished in a single afternoon. I sat at that kitchen table long after the kids left for school, walked by a neighbor since I couldn't bear to let them out of my sight, but also couldn't explain why without raising more questions. Options. I needed options. I could tell Callister about the text, share the photographs and the clipping and the threatening message. He had resources I didn't. Investigators, lawyers, money to throw at problems until they went away. But telling Callister meant trusting Callister. And Marcus's words kept echoing, he's lying. Not about everything, but about something. What if my son was right? What if Callister wasn't as free from his family as he claimed? What if I handed him this information and it went straight back to Cordelia? I could go to the police, file a report about the stalking, show them the letters and the photograph of my children at school. But what would I tell them? That a billionaire family from New York might be targeting me because I hid their grandchildren for 7 years? That I'd been living under a false story in their town, lying to everyone about who I was and where I came from? The moment I involved law enforcement, my secrets became evidence, documentation that could be subpoenaed, records that Vance family lawyers could access. I could run again, pack the car tonight, wake the kids, drive somewhere new, start over with fresh lies and fresh identities. But Mia's voice stopped me cold. How many times can you run before your kids realize it's not just the monsters chasing you? She was right. Running again would prove everything she accused me of. That I was a coward, that I chose escape over confrontation, that I'd rather drag my children into another false life than face the truth about myself. How many times can you run before your kids realize it's not just external threats you're fleeing, it's the ones you're afraid to face inside yourself? I didn't have an answer. I wasn't sure there was one. That night, alone on the porch again, I couldn't stop hearing her voice. He'll choose us, you know, in the end. They always do. Cordelia's words from Thornhaven, spoken with such casual certainty, like she was describing gravity or the sunrise, something inevitable that didn't require her intervention, only her patience. At the time, I'd thought she was talking about control, about the Vance family's ability to manipulate their children into compliance. And she was. But sitting there in the Iowa darkness, I realized the threat ran deeper. Callister said he'd cut her off. 3 years of silence. No contact. A complete break from the woman who'd destroyed his chance at happiness and lied to him about his own children. But blood is blood, and Cordelia had raised him, shaped him, programmed him with beliefs and loyalties that ran deeper than conscious thought. If she reached out now, if she made the right appeal, pushed the right buttons, offered the right combination of guilt and duty and family obligation, would he really stay away? He'd believed her lies for 7 years, believed that I was a gold digger who'd murdered his children for money. He'd married someone else, lived in her world, played by her rules, all while I was hiding in Iowa, raising the babies he thought were dead. He said he was different now, free, his own man. But Cordelia had been wrong about very few things in her life. When she said they always choose us in the end, she was speaking from decades of experience. And there was another parallel I couldn't ignore. My children might also choose, not between me and Callister, though that fear lived in my chest too, but between comfort and truth, between the mother who'd loved them fiercely but lied to them constantly, and the larger story of who they really were. The Vance name came with money, power, opportunities I could never provide on a receptionist's salary in Cedar Falls, private schools, trust funds, a legacy that stretched back generations. If my children decided they wanted that world, if they chose wealth and privilege over a farmhouse and firefly summers, could I blame them? Would I have the right to blame them, after everything I'd hidden? Cordelia's promise echoed in the darkness. They always choose us in the end. I was terrified she might be right about my children too. The next morning, I found Mia in the kitchen before Marcus woke up. She was eating cereal in silence, not looking at me, that cold wall still firmly in place. I sat down across from her, didn't speak at first, just let the silence stretch until she finally glanced up. "I need to tell you something," I said quietly, "about why I really hid you from your father." She didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. I told myself it was protection, and part of it was the fear was real, the threat was real. Your grandmother is a dangerous woman who would have done anything to control you. I paused, forced myself to continue. But that wasn't all of it. Mia waited. I was scared of losing you. Not to your father, to the truth. I was afraid that if you knew where you came from, if you knew about the money and the power and the world you could have been part of, you wouldn't want this life anymore. You wouldn't want me. My voice cracked on the last word. I hadn't planned to cry, hadn't wanted to make this about my emotions, but the tears came anyway. I spent 7 years hiding you from your father, from his family, from the whole world. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, but I think I was really hiding you from the truth about me. That I'm not brave, that I'm not selfless, that I made choices out of fear and pride, and the need to be the only one you needed. Mia was quiet for a long moment. Her expression hadn't softened, but it hadn't hardened further either. "That doesn't fix anything," she finally said. "I know. Saying sorry doesn't give us back 7 years of not knowing who we are. I know that too." She stood up, carried her bowl to the sink, stood there with her back to me. "I don't forgive you," she said quietly. "Not yet, maybe not ever. But—" a long pause. "But at least you finally told the truth about something." She walked out of the kitchen. A moment later, I heard her bedroom door close. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even a truce. But it was something, a crack in the wall. The first honest words between us since that parking lot. I looked at the photograph still sitting on the table. My children at school, being watched, being documented. Cordelia doesn't lose. Maybe not. But I wasn't the same scared 23-year-old who'd run from New York with nothing but a pregnant belly and a broken heart. I had 7 years of survival under my belt. 7 years of building something real in this town. 7 years of loving 2 children who might hate me right now, but were still mine. If Cordelia wanted a war, she'd have to earn her victory. I picked up my phone, scrolled to the number Callister had given me. My finger hovered over the call button. Whatever came next, I couldn't face it alone. I pressed call. If this story hit you anywhere in the gut, if you've ever lived with a secret that grew heavier the longer you carried it, tap like so more people can see it. Share it with someone who loves messy human stories. And subscribe to Beneath Our Last Name so you'll be here when we open the next envelope together. Because in the next part, you'll finally see what happens when Cordelia Vance learns her grandchildren are alive. And trust me, you'll want to know whether she's coming to claim them, destroy them, or something much, much worse. The Vances aren't done with us. They're just getting started.